Good morning, everybody. It's 11:03, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Janet's going to talk to us today about where we are at the South Atlantic LCC with cultural resources. Just another friendly reminder to go ahead and mute yourselves on your unit, your phone, if you haven't already. It does sound pretty quiet, but just make sure everyone can hear Janet. Are there any questions before we get started? All right, Janet, you're good to go.
Thanks, Hillary. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be able to talk with you today about some of our work in cultural resources. We may have a few people who are new to the LCCs on the phone, so I'll give a brief overview of what landscape conservation cooperatives are. Landscape conservation cooperatives are basically cooperative organizations covering seamless coverage throughout the United States and Alaska and other places. They're focused on natural and cultural resource conservation for the most part. Within our cooperative, which is the South Atlantic LCC, we have about 89 million acres, over 18,000 miles of shoreline, and 92% of that is private land. We're expecting to experience temperature increases across this geography, and things like sea level rise and urbanization. So the main approach to conserving natural and cultural resources in the landscape conservation cooperatives is really focused on using science and planning and combining that with collaboration and implementation to create a sustainable landscape for natural and cultural resources. So the mission of this particular cooperative is to create a shared blueprint for landscape conservation actions that sustain natural and cultural resources. And we'll talk a little bit more today about what that blueprint is and what it might mean for cultural resources. So I want to ask if there are any questions about what the South Atlantic Landscape Conservation Cooperative is or does before I move on. Okay, so when we began thinking about cultural resources here in the South Atlantic LCC, we didn't really have a real clear idea of where we were going. And we realized we wanted to reach out to cultural resource practitioners and the cultural resource community to really discover from them what they needed from this cooperative. So to do that, we met with the National Park Service Southeast Region Cultural Resources team. We met with the Catawba Indian Nation, and we attended the Gullah Geechee Management Plan rollout meeting and scoured their plan, of course, for ways that we could collaborate with them. We also, with the help of the National Park Service, we hosted a Southeast State Historic Preservation meeting in 2012. And we asked the state historic preservation offices, how can we best work together? And they said they would like for us to help them to partner better with natural resource conservationists. And they would like for the cooperative to help them understand more about how cultural resources are at risk from landscape change. And they said it would really be helpful to conduct some outreach to the community of cultural resource professionals working across our landscape and ask them some of the same questions. And so we began in the summer of 2013 an outreach and needs assessment exercise where we conducted telephone interviews of nonprofits and other organizations working in cultural resource conservation. So we talked to historic preservationists, archaeologists, archivists, tribes, landscape architects, garden clubs, and folk life preservationists and academics. All in all, we contacted over 40 organizations twice, once by email and once by telephone. And we sometimes contacted multiple people within the same organization. We asked everyone who responded. We had about a 33% response rate, and we asked everyone 9 specific questions. Questions designed to help us understand how we could best work together for cultural resource conservation. We asked them how they figured out how they fit into a broad cultural landscape, and what is the way landscape scale planning is valuable to cultural resources, and what kinds of incentives are there to conserve and sustain cultural resources. What are the disincentives? And are there any specific kinds of cultural resources that they thought LCCs or landscape conservation cooperatives could best assist with? And what is the way that landscape conservation cooperatives and their organization can collaborate? We wanted to know about their priorities and what role they saw for public-private cooperatives in cultural resource conservation and the connection between natural and cultural resource conservation. So through these 9 questions, we generally had very in-depth, hour-and-a-half long conversations with people who responded to our outreach. And primarily, people were really excited about these interviews. Some of the reasons were that the entire professional community kind of really recognizes that our cultural and natural resources improve the quality of life, making the South Atlantic a really great place to live. That's one of the things that they folks really emphasized. They said that tourists recognize the unique experiences that you can have in our part of the world. The visitation from tourism to the South Atlantic sustains about a $7 billion economy in just the coastal zone. And we have a tremendous amount of tourism in the interior as well. And we have highly skilled jobs in knowledge-based high-tech industries and biomedical industries a lot of times want to locate here because talented people want to live here. And so they said all of these things contribute to, these are all things that their work contributes to. And they said, it also can make it very difficult to implement cultural resource conservation. They said it's very complicated because urban poverty and inner city decline is pushing development to the edges. And development is one of the largest threats to cultural resource conservation. It changes the landscapes around historic places. They said that rural poverty can also be a very big problem, especially if you look at this map and you see the Piedmont area right along our geography. That rural, this is a map of non-metropolitan persistent poverty. So that's rural persistent poverty. And the darker spots here are metropolitan persistent poverty. So rural poverty leads to short-term decision-making and over-exploitation of resources and unmaintained, empty, historic buildings, which puts those buildings at a great risk. And so traditionally, people here gained their economic well-being from the land and from the resources, but they're getting to a point where the practices are changing so much that they overexploit those resources. But if we can do something to support cultural resource conservation, that the rewards are very, very big, especially if we can bring together natural and cultural environments, because that attracts tourism. An essential issue, according to our stakeholder outreach, was that there is this thing called a cultural landscape that's made up of people and wildlife, and those two things create a human imprint on a place. And so that human imprint and an understanding of how those people interacted with their surroundings was a part of our history and a part of our culture and central to cultural resource preservation. And when you conserve the land with the story and the objects related to it, you create this cultural landscape that people can experience and connect with. So they said in order to continue cultural resource conservation and continue their good work, they need more resources. This was according to our stakeholders and our outreach efforts. The respondents said they needed more resources. They said that tax programs could be better leveraged. They said that currently there were prohibitively stringent standards in historic preservation, and that could be counteracting cultural resource conservation. They also said that there was a basic lack of resources or people working in cultural resource conservation, and that made it difficult to further that cause. They said that we need to understand the long-term outlook for important places as the landscape changes around them. So a lot of what we were hearing related to cultural resource conservation was they wanted to do more work and do it more effectively and efficiently, and improve some of their resources that enable them to do that work. So we really saw this last item, understanding the long-term outlook for important sites as the landscape changes around them, as being something that was very compatible with our mission. Folks said when we asked them what do they specifically want and need from the cooperative, they said that the cooperative, the South Atlantic Landscape Conservation Cooperative, could provide and analyze data about landscape change, and that would be very helpful to them in their work. They said the cooperative could work to facilitate partnering between natural and cultural resource conservation organizations, and they could design a connected landscape that connects natural and cultural resource easements. So let me ask, are there any questions about our outreach and stakeholder assessment? Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what we did with the information that we got from our stakeholder assessment, and how that's going to help us put us in a position to better plan for conservation of cultural resources. So we took all of that input and formed a cultural resources committee, a group of 4 or 5 people, and provided them with the same information that I've provided you. This Wordle that you see in front of you is a Wordle that comes directly from the transcripts of all of those interviews. And you can see that a lot of what people talked about was related to people and conservation of natural landscapes and cultural landscapes, and a lot of the pieces that go into that. So we asked the Cultural Resources Committee what are the appropriate indicators that we need to utilize for planning for cultural resources. And so an indicator that came up was rural historic places. So what are the total number of rural historic register locations, rural national historic register locations that don't have nearby development? Places that, for whatever reason, kind of have the same landscapes, natural landscapes around them that they did at the time at their time of significance. How many of those are there, and can we maintain them into the future? was a question. And so we decided to create an indicator of rural historic places. The next indicator that we developed were acres of longleaf pine. This was an ecosystem that was prominent during Native American times and during colonialization. It was also very prominent during a time when the Gullah Geechee were transitioning from slavery. And so this ecosystem played an important role for many, many people in the South Atlantic. However, it seemed to be struggling, and there is not anywhere near as much longleaf pine today as there was at one time. Many of the cultural practices of people over our history in longleaf pine were related to the needles and the other natural products of this ecosystem that were then utilized to support life. So we wanted to designate that as an indicator for cultural resources. And finally, we chose to designate the clean water as a cultural resource indicator. This was already a natural resource indicator, but we wanted to recognize it as having tremendous cultural significance for many, many people. In colonial times and in Native American history, our waterways were used as forms of transportation. They supported life. A lot of our archaeological resources are near water. And even today, being able to swim in our waters is a very important cultural practice for many people. And so we wanted to designate that as a cultural resource as well. But we'll be measuring it based on some of the natural resource data on freshwater and estuarine integrity. So what does being an indicator mean? So these are great. They're indicators. What does that do for cultural resources? An indicator is a shared measure of success for the cooperative. And so that means that we're going to have to collect data to analyze it and determine its current and predicted status. So that gets back to that need that people said they had of the cooperative to understand how how cultural resources are affected by future landscape change. So as being an indicator means that those historic places will be analyzed and will predict out into the future what are potential landscape change impacts to those resources. Once we analyze the data, then that data is used to inform developing a conservation blueprint. We have the first version of our conservation blueprint, and I want to describe how that was developed. First, we held workshops that about 300 people came to. We had some cultural resource practitioners at those workshops. We had the indicators defined, and so data about those indicators were at these workshops. So we had the National Register of Historic Places there. We had data, as much data as we could about clean water and longleaf. We brought folks together in 4 different workshops and started those workshops off by having large, big picture discussions about the landscape. What did we want to see on the landscape? What is it that we wanted to accomplish? Then the groups identified what we needed to do and where we needed to work on the landscape. And they all sat down at a computer and crafted that blueprint on a map, pointing out specifically where the places were that needed to be conserved and the actions that we needed to take to conserve them. So on that map, and I was at many of these discussions, we held lots of discussions about cultural resources, pointing out specific places that were important because of their historic significance or because of their potential for being one of those places that could remain unchanged by some kind of development. And so we developed a map of future actions, and this is what that looks like for cultural resources. This is the South Atlantic. You can see these green dots. Those are rural historic places that are predicted to experience development by 2050. These purple areas on the blueprint are highest priority areas for conservation. And so you can see, especially down here in the Gullah Geechee corridor, many of those places coincide with this purple highest priority, a lot of which is placing lands into conservation. And I was at the table, one of the tables that put some of these into conservation, and they specifically talked about their importance to the Gullah Geechee. You also can see some of those places coming up along these. These are really river corridors. And so what I found that happened quite frequently is someone from a natural resource conservation organization would start putting an area, identifying it as being important for the blueprint, and then there'd be a historic place right next to it, or really close, and they would say, well, let's just grab this area over here as well so that we can include these historic resources as a part of this plan for conservation. And so it was really exciting to see some of that starting to happen, because I think that that's going to position us well for partnering into the future. Longleaf pine, we have analyzed some of the data on longleaf pine, and that's improving, where longleaf pine is actually increasing between 2004 and 2011. And so we are on a good trajectory for longleaf pine, so we hope to be able to accomplish a target and have success with longleaf pine into the future. And clean water was very central to that blueprint, version 1.0. We are using the freshwater and estuarine integrity based on natural resource indicators. But as you could see, let me go to that previous map of blueprint version 1.0. As you can see, a lot of these highest priorities, and the blue is a high priority area, they do follow a lot of the water corridors. And so that will serve to help improve water quality and help us support fishable and swimmable waters based on this indicator. And that analysis is close to completion. There are ways that you can participate if you're particularly interested in cultural resources. You could join our webpage at southatlanticlcc.org, or you could attend a workshop for Blueprint 2.0. And you can register for that. We'll be holding those in Raleigh, Atlanta, Tallahassee, and Charleston. They're free, and they're open to anyone who'd like to attend. We hope to have a draft Blueprint version 2.0 in April, and we hope to complete that version by June of 2015. We'd really like to see a good representation from the cultural resources community at these workshops. I think that the more that we can create a plan that reflects the vision of both a natural and a cultural resource conservation community, the more chances we're going to have for an integrated plan that we can use to form the basis to further partnering between our two professions. So, any questions about our blueprint or any of that work?
There's plenty of time for questions or discussion.
Well, this is Mary Davis. I'm from the more environmental conservation side of things, and I've just want to say I've learned a lot listening to this and appreciate the opportunity to hear you. But my question is, as I look at the river corridors and think about the cultural resources that are centered around the rivers, I was wondering if your set of indicators considered protecting the river corridor itself, like easements or land protection of some sort along the rivers, or was it just water quality that you considered?
Yeah, that's a really great question. What ended up happening is by designating clean water as an indicator, then when we went into the workshops, we had those specific actions that participants could choose from and say, we think we need an easement here. We think we need to buffer these waterways to either maintain or improve water quality. And so those are the actions that the map here represents. If we zoomed in, then you would see that there's quite a bit of land on either side of these corridors that has been put into that purple or highest priority. Our ability to make this plan happen is real. I'm really excited about this because before we went into the creation of this plan, we analyzed how much money is being spent on conservation easements and conservation. And we discovered that we could put about 10% of land into some kind of conserved status by 2050. And so we restricted all of our working groups to only putting 10% of land into that conserved status. So this reflects something that's achievable, and it reflects a lot of those actions that you mentioned.
And Janet, if I could also add, bringing up the idea of riparian protection as being important, that's something that's captured in one of our freshwater aquatic indicators, which is not something Janet highlighted here because she was focusing more on the cultural resource aspects, and this isn't particularly a cultural resource indicator, but we do capture the percent of natural habitat near rivers, streams, and large water bodies as an ecological indicator in our freshwater aquatic ecosystem.
Right.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, I'll add one other thing to that. So this is Rua. That it was really interesting to me I was up at this that large workshop on large landscape conservation, and they were talking about cultural landscapes up in this Chesapeake, and one of the big metrics they were using was this sort of view shed around the river. That sort of, again, it was the riparian buffer component, and it was really interesting how complementary part of the things that people value from you're kayaking down the river cultural context and what it takes for a healthy ecosystem. It's nice to see those complementary, yes.
And I think recreation on rivers is really an important part of the tourism industry as well. We have some organizations and nonprofits that have been able to revitalize rural economies just based on drawing recreation to clean water for kayaking and canoeing. So I think there are a lot of connections between the cultural resources and the health of the natural environments and sustainable economies in our rural communities. So I'm really excited to see this plan coming together because as a community of conservation professionals, whether we're natural resources or cultural resources, we could, if we all worked together, we could create something greater than this simple sum of all of our work. A plan that allows for a whole sustainable landscape, something that can support a variety of species and a variety of types of cultural experiences would be really phenomenal.
Yeah, you may, I don't know if you're looking for examples. You're probably already aware, but the Swanee River Water Management District in Florida has, for many years now, been buying up the riparian corridor and making it into a canoe trail, and really has created incredible resource down there. And more than just keeping the riparian corridor intact, it's protecting it from being destroyed. And the Altamaha River is the other example that comes to my mind in your area. The Nature Conservancy was very active for 20 years or more, that, again, buying up land as it became available and protecting that corridor. And, of course, the Chattahoochee and the National Recreation Area there through Atlanta is another great example. But, if you don't buy it up, I've learned that you can't protect it. And so it may be intact now, but we've got to protect it.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Especially with the water resources. One of the things that you don't see on this map is there are a lot of existing conservation easements, and that data was available to our workshop participants. And so what they're doing here with this map is they're filling in those gaps.
Yeah.
And so what we have on the cultural resource side with the building, just like you mentioned, if you don't get out there and buy that land, it's gonna transition over to something else like Walmart. not that I don't like Walmart, but it's gonna transition into some kind of other potential use, especially in the areas that are around our cities, as our suburbs kind of get pushed out further and further. And you can see this happen with our cultural resources, our historic buildings. You don't have to look too far to find a beautiful historic building that's been perfectly preserved that shares a border with the parking lot for the Dollar General, or that the Chick-fil-A, or whatever else just got stuck right next to it. And maybe that's okay for some buildings, but I feel like I'd like to see some maintain their original landscapes. So looking at, that's one of the reasons why we decided to make these rural historic places an indicator. Are there any other questions about our work in cultural resource conservation?
Hi. I had a question. This is Bill O'Byrne, and I think you had said that you guys were targeting about 10% of the purple most valuable or highest priority areas?
Yes.
And have you got like a dollar figure, a ballpark figure of what that would cost?
I do. I don't have it at my fingertips, but I can send it to you. Let me give you guys my email address, and then if you send me an email, I'll send you that information.
Great.
Yeah, and this is the same. We're talking about using that same 10% rule for the revision, the new updated blueprint that we're going to have out in April. But that same sort of 10% constraint on like how much we could realistically spend on that land and water protection side.
Mm-hmm. And then one other question would be, I know there's a lot of other agencies and NGOs that are doing conservation work. How are you guys coordinating with them?
Rua,
through the LCC, or are there other means?
It's primarily through the LCC.
Okay.
We have a variety of federal, state, and nonprofit organizations on our steering committee. A lot organizations can participate on any of our committees and sign up for our website. We're not a governmental organization. We're a public-private cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
Some of our staff members, like I myself, am paid for by the National Park Service, and I work for the National Park Service, and this is a part of my duties. However, my work really is designed to reflect the needs and ideas of the conservation community, and my role is really more of a facilitator, as facilitating that community and plugging into the work here at the LCC.
Yeah, this is. Oh, go ahead, Janet.
I was going to turn it over to ask you if you could add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to add. I think that was good. I was going to add a couple things. So this first version of the blueprint, just for a sense of scale, we had more than 300 people from 85 different organizations that were involved and actively involved, had some kind of fingerprint on them. And so we do a lot of stuff from the web community, from the bottom up kind of things. We also have that steering committee of sort of deputy director, director level organizations that are at the table, and they've all agreed that they want this blueprint to be a gold standard for conservation investment. So one of the things that they use. And that actually is, we're in the process of potentially adding a few other organizations to that group as well. So there's from a structure perspective, but also on the line you've already heard Hillary, who's one of our staff that works on blueprint user support. And so she spends her time working with users of the blueprint and our 42-member user team, and anyone that wants to try to use this blueprint to make a decision to help them incorporate it into their sort of decisions and planning processes.
Great, thanks.
Anyone else want to jump in?
So I'm just going to put that schedule for our blueprint workshops up here one more time.
Great.
I can't emphasize enough how helpful it would be to have the cultural resource community engage at these workshops. They're only one day. They'll go from around 9 a.m. to 3:30, and registration is free. All you have to do is get there, and you can go to our webpage to register at www.southatlanticlcc.org/page/workshops. We'll be having them in Raleigh in February, on February the 18th and 19th. We'll have them in Atlanta in March, on March the 9th and 10th. We will be in Tallahassee on March 11th and 12th, and Charleston, South Carolina, March 17th and 18th. So we hope to see you at one of our workshops.
They'll all have their own fun, different character. So far we're getting interesting things lined up for each. So in Raleigh, we're actually going to have it in a big visualization space. It's going to have a big 270-degree wraparound screen. So that'll be fun. We've already got some nonprofit sponsorship going for some other ones for food and snacks. And you only need to attend one, unless you want to attend more than one. But they'll all be the same. So yeah, hope to see you there.
So I guess, Hillary, I'll turn it back over to you unless there are any other questions.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. Anyone who's new, we typically have a third Thursday webinar on the third Thursday of every month. That was getting pretty close to the holiday season, so Janet did this wonderful webinar in lieu of our regularly scheduled web forum. But if you're not a member of our website, if you join, you'll get monthly reminders about this web forum as well as our monthly newsletter. So if any of you like what you heard, we'd love to have you on January's third Thursday web forum in the new year. Thank you all so much for coming, and we hope to see you at a workshop in the spring.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.